Franck Muller is one of those brands that were immensely popular in the 90s and the early 2000s. They started their business back in 1992, led by a talented watchmaker called Franck Muller that created beautiful timepieces that nowadays the early Franck Mullers fetch very high prices on auctions and on the market. Complicated watches, perpetual calendar, beautiful chronographs with Breguet numerals. I'm a big fan of those early Franck Muller pieces. Along the way, with their bold aesthetics, their bold designs, their use of the tonneau-shaped case that is one of the oldest case designs in watchmaking, in wristwatches at least, that they made popular again during the 90s and early 2000s. But somewhere along the way, they kind of lost their way a bit, and nowadays they have lost much of that status that they once had. However, with the Vanguard line that was introduced back in 2013, they have started to gain some of that lost popularity that they once had. Most of the critique regarding the Franck Muller watches has been that they have had a very high retail price tag with a movement that doesn't really match that price, and the secondary prices of Franck Muller watches has been quite shitty, to say the least, for a long time. But nowadays something interesting has happened within the brand. They are producing their own in-house movement that they have developed and that they are implementing in many watches. I was at their manufacturer that's called Watchland this summer during Geneva Watch Days and saw the behind-the-scenes action, so to say, and it was a very interesting visit to the factory, and I saw many behind the scenes of their complicated watch departments, such as the Crazy Hour complication that they are very famous for, and also their tourbillons that are very impressive. So I think personally Franck Muller are on their way back to some popularity. And today we're taking a closer look at 4 different models from the Vanguard lineup. So we have 3 different sized watches, starting with the smallest that is 32mm wide, and then we have one that's 35mm wide, and also 3 different models within the 41mm case width. And I must say, I like these models, especially the smaller ones. Big shocker there. I think that they are kind of bold and something you don't see every day on people's wrists. And I've always been intrigued by Franck Muller. I like their take on the classical wristwatch shaped cases, such as the tonneau shape, and also with their Cintrée Curvex line. They have made some interesting pieces back then. Unfortunately, the last couple of years they have had a very big focus on very big watches, such as the 45mm Vanguards that are just pretty hard to wear on a normally sized wrist. So I hope they will, maybe focus a bit more on the mid-sized watches in the future. So let's take a closer look at all the 5 watches that we have with us today. And the smallest one measures 32mm in width and is about 42mm long. So for me that likes to wear a traditionally sized Cartier Santos, it's very close to the dimensions. The Santos is 29 by 41. So for me, this one is closest to the things I usually wear. The 35mm version is 46mm long. So this one is about the largest I feel comfortable with for my wrist, even though I'm lying a bit here since this one is 47.5mm long. Then we have a pretty interesting version from the 41mm case size, and that is their line cut that is fully made in titanium with a titanium bracelet with a very nicely sandblasted finish. And the 41mm versions are 50mm long, so these ones are on the large end for my 16.5cm wrist. What is nice with the line cut compared to the other 2 41mm models that we have is that it is their ultra slim version with an in-house movement, and it's only about 9.1mm in thickness compared to the other 2 models from the 41mm lineup that are 12.3mm thick. And for the smaller sizes, I forgot to mention that the 32mm version is just below 10mm in thickness, and the 35 is just above at 10.4mm. In terms of wrist presence, with a tonneau shaped case, they they usually wear quite big, as you can see here. And I want to shine some light upon the smaller sized Franck Muller watches, especially the 32 and the 35, of course, because I think they are wrongfully marketed as the lady sizes. And I understand that from, you know, Franck Muller's point of view, because they are known to make large and bulky watches and, you know, attention grabbing watches, so to say. However, if you have a smaller sized wrist like mine, I think that the 32 and 35 millimeter versions wear really nice on the wrist, and I think they look really good as well. Movement wise, as I mentioned, the critique towards the brand has come from using cheaper movements, ETA based movements. In the line cut we have an in-house movement. However, in the other versions we have modified ETA movements. For me personally, it's not an issue. I usually more of a buy what I like in terms of design and not too much movement focused. And for the 32 and 35 millimeter versions, there are both automatic and quartz movements available. However, for the 41s and above, there's automatic movements. So on the movement side, it's nothing too impressive, I must say. But however, I've seen their in-house movement in the flesh. I know they're going to start to implement this movement into many different models within the Franck Muller lineup. It's going to be interesting to see how that is received by the general public, so to say. And I must say, one of my favorite complications from the brand is the Crazy Hour complication that they introduced in 2003, and that is one of the, let's call it, most recognizable complications for the brand. And I'll demonstrate it here. It's how the hour hand jumps across the dial, and it's a cool complication. People are quite amazed every time they see one. It's a simple but cool complication, I must say, because when you see how it works, and if you take a closer look, you'll see that it's jumping within a fixed amount of hours every time. And here we can also see behind the scenes of the Crazy Hour complication from the movement side, how it works. So it's quite cool. It's simple, but it's cool, and it's something that Franck Muller is very famous for. So guys, this was just a quick video to show you a couple of pieces from the Vanguard lineup, especially the smaller ones, that I think people shouldn't neglect immediately just because they are marketed as the latest pieces. I like them. I'm intrigued by them. I think they are a quite bold statement on the wrist, but also something that's quite fun. And I think Franck Muller is a brand that has a turbulent background, but quite interesting history, with a very skilled watchmaker that was and founded the brand. And I want to see what else they have in the pipeline in the future, because somewhere I think they have the potential to restore some of that greatness that they had during the late 90s, early 2000s. And it's going to be an interesting brand to follow within the upcoming years. So with that said, I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to hit the thumbs up to this video if you liked it, and subscribe to the channel. And I'll see you guys next time.